Hello, I'm Morgan Peckma, and this is City and State TV. Today we are on location in beautiful downtown Buffalo on the top floor of the Rath Building with County Executive Mark Poloncarz. County Executive, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome to my home.
This is a beautiful office. You recently delivered your State of the County address. Can you talk about some of the highlights?
Well, I certainly talked about the economic rebound that we've seen in this community over the last few years, how the sort of 50 years of just wandering in the desert in Buffalo and Erie County seems to have ended. You've got this tremendous rebirth, an economy that's moving in the right direction. They just released new unemployment figures today, and the January 2014 numbers as compared to January of 2013, where the unemployment rate dropped from 8.9% to 7.2% in January. That's a substantial drop in a year-to-year analysis. Those are the things we're seeing here. So we talked about what we're doing as a community and what we're doing as a county to reach that point, but also noting that there are significant elements in our society that are not seeing this great economic rebound, how people at the lowest rungs of the economic ladder are not seeing it, and how we need to address those issues. Erie County in itself is not unusually poor. Its actual poverty level is lower than the state and national averages. But the city of Buffalo has significant issues, as being noted as one of the third poorest cities in the nation, and how we have to address these issues of poverty. Because if we can do that and raise everyone else at the time that we are seeing this great economic rebound, it's certainly going to help the greater community and certainly cut down costs that we see on the county level as being the primary provider of health and human services. So I talked about that in my State of the County and how we as a community need to come together to address this issue.
And you're the former Erie County Comptroller, and we've heard a lot about the Buffalo billion. And how much of that billion has actually come to Buffalo so far?
Well, the vast majority of it that's been discussed and talked about we haven't seen. There are companies that are starting to come into this area based on the announcements, and they're starting to look at the places where they're going to set up shop. The governor at the end of last year, and I was pleased to join him, announced the Riverbend site in the city of Buffalo, where two new high-tech green companies are going to be building new headquarters in the United States, one from China, one from California, here in Buffalo. That site sale for the land just completed, so now they're moving on to the next phase of starting to put the infrastructure in place so that those companies can be in place hopefully by the end of, if not this year, the beginning of next year. So those are the things that are going on. So a lot of the Buffalo billion announcements that we've made, for example, IBM just recently with 500 jobs from this area, those are set in stone, but we still don't have the jobs in place. So I expect to see this economic rebound continue over the next few years as the jobs associated with the Buffalo billion become reality.
So when we see the residual effects of that investment. Have we seen investment in the rest of Erie County, or has it really just been focused like a laser on Buffalo?
Well, my administration has been focused on investment throughout Erie County. The Buffalo billion is primarily located in the central core because I think we know as a community, so goes the city of Buffalo, so goes Erie County, so goes the rest of Western New York, because there's a residual effect from how Erie County is doing to how Niagara County, Chautauqua County, Allegheny County are doing. So what we're doing by focusing the Buffalo billion on the city of Buffalo, it is the sort of the headquarters of our region, and we need to strengthen the city of Buffalo, and as a result, the rest of the area should see a benefit. What we're doing in my administration, at the same time that the governor and others are focused solely on Buffalo, is to ensure that we're not leaving out other communities. So we're focusing on the needs of our suburban towns, as well as our rural villages and the farmland, because a lot of people forget about it. Erie County is like a small state. We have this urban core, we have a strong suburban core, and we also have a lot of rural areas out there. It's a neat thing about being in my office is I can be right here down at a business meeting in downtown Buffalo and get in a car, and 45 minutes later I can be out in Eden Corn land. I can be out where the dairy area is on the eastern suburbs of Erie County. So it doesn't take that long to be from downtown to the rural area. It's one of the reasons I like Erie County, because it's kind of like a small state. But when you've got different issues like a state, it makes it very difficult to ensure that you're keeping an economy that's growing for the entire community. And that's what my administration's focused on.
Do you think that Buffalo and the economic rebound in Erie County, can that be a model for Rust Belt cities and areas like this throughout the country?
Maybe. I mean, some of the things that that are put in place right now have been going on for, truthfully, many years. The Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus didn't happen overnight. That was an idea that was formulated basically a decade ago by then Mayor Anthony Masiello. They decided, we have this economy that's growing with regards to the medical area, so why don't we create a medical corridor, similar to what other cities have done. The investment that you see with the Buffalo Billion, in some ways, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I don't see many other states investing $1 billion in a region like this governor in this state has, nor do I see it truthfully happening in other parts of New York State, because it is a significant amount of money. When people ask me, when I talk to other county executives, why this is happening here, I just remind them that this community has felt like it's been neglected for 50 years. The county's population has dropped by approximately 300,000 over the last 30 years. So it's just not the city of Buffalo that's lost population, even Erie County has lost population. So what you got to remember is that we've had a bad 50 years. And what they're doing today, in some ways, is helping to make up for the lack of infrastructure and the lack of investment that we saw from the state level during those 50 years. It's having an impact. But I'm glad to say that we're also taking advantage of other things that other communities can't have. I mean, we are 90 minutes away from Toronto, the financial capital of Canada. Canada is the United States' #1 trading partner. More goods come across the border here than any other part of the United States. We have that advantage that we're able to take care of with regards to logistical businesses and transportation businesses that nowhere else, truthfully, in New York State they can. We're building our economy based on that. So there's a lot of things that are going on that are sort of working in tandem here that I don't think you could replicate elsewhere.
Yeah, well, I actually wanted to ask you specifically about the relationship between Erie County and Ontario. We've seen the cranes up here in Buffalo, but really where you see a tremendous amount of cranes are up in Toronto. And it seems like that's ripe for opportunity. What are you trying to do to kind of unlock all that investment that can come from Canada into Erie County?
Well, we've made a concerted effort to actually go up there and appeal to Canadian businesses to open up subsidiaries in the United States. We're not trying to steal their Canadian companies and move them here, because first off, it's not going to work. The Canadians are not going to move their businesses to New York State. But what we are doing is telling the Canadians, if you're interested in opening up an American subsidiary, you shouldn't be down in Tennessee, you shouldn't be in Texas or Ohio, you should be in Buffalo, you should be in Erie County, for many reasons. First off, our tax rates are lower than Ontario. A lot of people find it hard to believe when they talk about New York and taxes, but it's actually lower in New York than it is in southern Ontario. We have this logical connection as a result of this region being what's considered sort of the golden horseshoe around Lake Ontario. We're only 90 minutes away from Toronto, so when I talk to a business leader in Canada, I could say you could have a breakfast meeting in your office in Mississauga. You can drive down the Queen Elizabeth Way and have a lunch meeting in Buffalo, attend to a few other meetings, and then be back in time for a Maple Leafs game at 7 o'clock in Toronto. And where else in the United States can a Canadian business do that, where they're only 90 minutes away from their financial headquarters? And we're seeing successes. One of the most important things that we've been able to do is to rebuild the old Bethlehem Steel site in Lackawanna, New York. By investing county dollars and state dollars on infrastructure, we were able to bring Welded Tube of Canada with a $40 million investment there, and they're hoping to have over 100 new jobs. They've got 50 there right now, but they're hoping to ramp it up to about 100 by the end of this year. That's a success story because we courted them. They weren't going to come here, but we courted them, and we showed through our own money where our mouth is, so to speak, by investing on the infrastructure needs there, that we could be as competitive as anywhere in the United States. And now we're hearing they're doing tremendously. There's other companies, Gracious Living out of Toronto, that's going to set up shop here with 250 new jobs. Why? Because it makes sense. It makes logistical sense, it makes transportation sense. It certainly makes it much more easier for them to travel with their business leaders for an hour-and-a-half drive than it is to get in a plane and spend 2 days traveling just to get your local headquarters. It's working.
And how important are Canadian consumers to helping the local economy here in Erie County?
Well, I think the one thing that people sometimes forget is that we're much closer to Toronto or Cleveland than we are New York City. I get calls from people every now and then, so how often do you go into downtown? I say, you talking about downtown Buffalo or New York City? And they're like, New York City. And it's like, well, very rarely. Downtown Buffalo all the time. But I go to downtown Toronto more than I go to downtown New York City because it is such a short drive. Our exchange rate is still not so bad. The cost of goods here is much less. So if a Canadian's going to come in and buy a big screen television, they can buy it at a lower cost to begin with in the United States, and with the exchange rate basically still being at par, they're going to be saving a lot of money. Canadian consumers coming across the various bridges to shopping in the United States does have a positive impact on our sales tax. And that's something we've seen for many years now. It is a good thing. If you go to the area malls, doesn't matter what day of the week, doesn't have to be just during the holiday shopping time, you will see Ontario license plates in at least a quarter of the cars that are in the malls. And that's what you see in this community, is a lot of trans-border traffic. When I look out the window of my office behind me, I can see Fort Erie, Ontario. It's right out that window. It's pretty close. That's the joke. I can actually see another country from my office.
Like Sarah Palin.
It's like, yes, Sarah, she couldn't really see it. I can. You can actually see it across the Niagara River there. And those people work in our community. They just don't come here to shop. Many of those people work in our community, and back and forth trade has been going on for over 200 years. We're trying to take it to the next step by bringing the Canadian businesses here and also reminding the Canadian consumers, continue to shop here. You're our friends. They go to our Sabres games. They go to our Bills games. They ski at our ski resorts. They shop at our malls. Now we're trying to create another level where we're actually really being investment partners back and forth, and it's succeeding.
Did the dust up over the Peace Bridge hurt local commerce?
The dust up over the Peace Bridge did not hurt local commerce because it really didn't slow down traffic at the border, unlike what we saw in New Jersey. This did not have an impact of border crossing traffic. It did not necessarily help relationships between some people because they were wondering what was happening behind the scenes. But when I talked to the Fort Erie Mayor, Doug Martin, and when we do have meetings on a quarterly basis between all the local major officials on both sides of the border, we agree that, yeah, there's no hard feelings between us, but we realized there were some issues that could have slowed down the progress that we've seen recently. I'm glad to say that didn't happen, and consumers are still coming across the border to shop here.
Do you feel that, I mean, obviously Governor Cuomo's taken such a great interest in this area. Do you feel that that Albany generally has a good comprehension of the needs of Western New York and your county?
I think the governor does. I don't know if every member of the Senate and Assembly do. I think it's important that they understand, yes, they represent their districts when they go to Albany, but they're making decisions that impact everyone. And I don't think very many of them have actually ever set foot in Western New York, nevertheless Buffalo or Erie County. I think it's important that they do that because what's happening in the capital impacts just not the Bronx and Manhattan or Suffolk, it impacts everything. And those are the problems that we've had over the years, is we did not feel that Albany was actually responsive to the needs of this community or even listening. It's one thing to be responsive, it's another thing to even listen to the pleas of the community. The governor has made it one of the top priorities of his administration to focus on this community, and it's having positive impacts. And I think assemblymen and senators who are not from this region may grumble as to why we're spending this money on Buffalo. Well, if they are grumbling, it's because they probably don't understand the predicament we've been in for the last 50 years.
You're a Democrat. This is, like most of New York State, is a very Democratic area. And yet, recently, Republicans have had surprising success in a number of elections. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, Erie County is a very interesting county because while it's a heavy Democratic enrollment, since 1960, there's only been 2 Democratic county executives, and I'm the second. So it goes to show that what you often can see are people who are enrolled as Democrats but can be much more conservative, especially on fiscal issues, and that's what we see here. There's a very anti-tax mentality that goes on in this community. Erie County's got one of the lowest taxable rates per thousand of any county across New York State, and I still hear from people, it's not enough, you got to basically reduce taxes to nothing. Well, you can't have that because you still need to provide the services that the public wants. I think it's fair to say that people are sort of, after the last 40 or 50 years in this area of Western New York and seeing so many people leave because of job loss and not being able to find jobs here, that they just became more conservative in nature and sort of rebelling against the thought that Albany is controlled by downstate interests. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I've got, in some ways, what could be considered a pretty progressive liberal agenda as it pertains to addressing poverty. And when I go around and talk to people in the community, they don't rebel against that. I think they're not rebelling against it because we are seeing this job growth and this economic rebound. If we weren't seeing the economic rebound and we weren't seeing the job growth, then I think many people in this community would say, why are you focusing on poverty? You need to be focusing on the economy first. And that's what we did. We've been focusing on the economy for the first 2 years in my administration. It's headed in the right direction. So now I think it's an opportunity to go into other areas that what a more conservative part of this community might say no, is much more responsive and receptive to dealing with that now as they see the economy rebound. It's sort of a weird area. If you look at presidential elections, it almost always votes Democratic. But if you look at local elections, you often will see a Republican get elected. And I think it has a lot more to do with the fiscal issues than some of what would be considered the more social issues.
Has there been a problem with disunity within the local Democratic Party as well?
Well, there's always been little facets and different problems that exist in the Democratic Party. I was reading a book a couple of years ago, and I was reminding folks about it, and it was on the 100th anniversary of the 1912 presidential election. And it talked about how the Democratic candidate for president that year was Woodrow Wilson, and the Democratic powers that be around the country sent Woodrow Wilson into Erie County to try to bring peace with the warring factions of the Democratic Party, because they realized if they were going to win New York State, they had to win Erie County. So I remind everybody who talks about, well, it's a fight in Erie County, it's always been like that. But part of it is because of what you see in the city of Buffalo. There is no Republican Party. They may exist on paper, there is no Republican Party. And what you often see are Democrats in the city of Buffalo will fight amongst themselves because they don't have Republicans to fight against. Now, I live in the city of Buffalo, but I represent all of Erie County. And when you step out of the side of Erie County, you see a strong Republican Party in many of the towns and across the county. So what I remind Democrats is we have a lot more in common than those on the other side of the political aisle. And I would much rather debate those on the other side of the political aisle about why we should be in power, so to speak, because we truly represent the people of this community, than fighting amongst ourselves. But do I expect it to end overnight? No. It's been going on for over 100 years here.
We've heard from a lot of people since we've been here about the SAFE Act. How important is the SAFE Act to your constituents? Is there still animosity and anger over the SAFE Act?
Depends on where you go. If you stay in the city of Buffalo in the inner ring suburbs, there's strong support for the SAFE Act. If you go into the outer ring suburbs and the rural areas, then there's very little support for the SAFE Act. In my role as county executive, I very, very rarely hear anybody talk about the SAFE Act. What I hear people talking about, are we creating jobs for this community? Do we have the programs in place that the public wants to ensure we've got strong parks and our roads are safe, especially after a very difficult winter, which has taken a toll with lots of potholes on the roads? Do you have a strong child protective service unit to protect children in this community? Those are the things I hear from the public. And as I say, if you actually did a poll of this region, I wouldn't be surprised to see if it was 50-50, because the inner city supports the SAFE Act, the inner ring suburbs support it, and the exurbs don't. But that's basically 50% of Erie County and how it's split out. That's what I see.
You're talking about the roads. I mean, what are your foremost infrastructure needs? What would, if you could wave your magic wand, what does Erie County need the most?
Well, there's a lot of infrastructure needs. Unfortunately, a lot of things have been neglected for many years. I mean, we're going to be spending nearly $40 million in infrastructure needs this upcoming year, of which over half of that is applicable to roads and bridges. Erie County, and most people would be surprised to hear this, but Erie County has 2,400 lane miles of roads that we own and control. That's more than the states of Rhode Island, Delaware, and Hawaii. So when I say Erie County is like a small state, I'm not kidding. We actually control and own as many lane miles as those three states do. And we also have a responsibility to repair them. And it's not easy to do when it costs roughly $300,000 per lane mile to just do a mill and overlay, or $1.5 million to $1.75 million of dollars just to do a complete reconstruction of the road. And so you're taught $23 million is a lot of money you spend on roads, but when it comes down to how many roads you can fix in a year and completely rebuild, it's not a lot. So this winter has not been a good one, because it certainly has taken a toll on many of the roads in this area. We hear from the public they want good, safe roads, and they deserve good, safe roads. And there's things that we work on every day. Erie County's got a $1.4 billion budget, but only about 10% of it like most other counties, we control. The rest is all subject to state and federal mandates. And the roads and the parks and all those other things that the public demands are in that 10% that we control. The 90% of mandated expenses, we have not a whole lot of control over, and that's the vast majority of our budget. So it makes it very difficult on an annual basis to ensure that we're providing the needs of the community while still ensuring that we're meeting the needs, so to speak, of the state and federal government.
And lastly, I mean, you spoke at a conference that we had in New York City about mandate relief. I mean, have you seen any forward steps that are positive in helping you out in that direction?
We haven't seen a tremendous amount of change with regards to mandate relief. There's a few things that the New York State Association of Counties, of which Erie County is a part of, has been pushing for, and there's discussions on it, but there hasn't been a tremendous amount. We actually spend more money on an annual basis taking care of Medicaid in Erie County, its portion of it, than we bring in our property tax. So if we actually did not have to cover that more than $220 million of cost for Medicaid that the county is responsible for, I easily could provide on an annual basis many more services and repair many more roads, but I don't see that happening in the near future because I don't expect New York State to take on the local share. There's a lot of things that could be done that would make it easier for the localities. I'm not necessarily seeing it, but I also have to commend the state for its investment in this community, because if they were not investing the Buffalo billion in this community, I think we'd be further behind than where we are today. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. We're not seeing the mandate relief in specific areas, but we're seeing the money come in through the economic relief that's making a big difference in helping us basically rise as the tide goes up.
Has the property tax cap complicated things for you?
It's had no impact on Erie County. We've not even come close to the property tax cap. We actually have one of the lowest tax rates. Our tax rate is about $5.03 per thousand. Most other counties are at $10 per thousand or above. So when we talk about either just assessment growth, our assessment growth is never at a point where we have to worry about the property tax cap, and at no time has there ever been discussion of even going over the cap. Now local governments, some towns and villages have had to deal with the issues associated with the property tax cap, but for Erie County it's not an issue.
Mr. County Executive, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Morgan.